The wind beyond the wall had always been cruel, but that night it felt different. It did not just bite the skin, it felt like it was searching for something. Jon Snow stood alone on the frozen ground, his black cloak snapping behind him like a torn flag. The sky above was empty, no stars, no moon, just darkness pressing down on the world. In front of him lay thousands of dead bodies scattered across the snow, men he had fought beside, wildlings who had trusted him, brothers who had once called him Lord Commander. And at the center of it all stood the Night King. Blue eyes like frozen fire stared at him, calm, waiting. Jon tightened his grip around Longclaw, his breath came out in white clouds. He had faced death many times before, he had died once already, but this felt different, this felt final. The Night King did not rush. He stepped forward slowly, almost curious. Around them, the remaining whites froze in place, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Jon charged first, shouting as steel met ice. Longclaw clashed against the Night King's blade, sending a sharp crack through the silent field. They moved fast, faster than any man could follow. Jon swung again and again, anger and fear pushing him forward. He thought of Winterfell, of Arya, of Sansa, of Daenerys, of the living. He fought for all of them. But the Night King did not tire. One heavy strike knocked Longclaw from Jon's hand. The Valyrian sword slid across the ice, far out of reach. Jon fell to his knees, gasping. The Night King stood over him now. For a moment there was no attack, no killing blow. Just silence. The Night King tilted his head slightly, studying him. Then, instead of raising his blade, he slowly reached out his pale hand. Jon tried to move, but his body felt frozen. The cold was no longer outside him. It was inside his blood, spreading fast. When the Night King's hand touched his chest, it was not like being stabbed. It was like drowning in ice. Jon screamed, but no sound came out. His eyes rolled back as the cold poured into him, filling his heart, his veins, his mind. He saw flashes of memories, his mother's face, though he never truly knew her. Ned Stark's quiet strength, Ygritte smiling in the snow. You know nothing, Jon Snow. Then everything shattered. When he opened his eyes again, the world looked different. The snow no longer felt cold. The wind no longer hurt. He stood slowly, steady on his feet. The Night King stepped back, watching. Jon looked down at his hands. The skin was pale, almost white, veins dark and thin like cracks in ice. He could feel something new inside him, not a heartbeat that was gone, but power, endless and ancient. He turned his head and saw them. The dead. Thousands of bodies lying broken across the battlefield. Without knowing how, Jon raised his hand. And they rose with him. The sound was sickening, bones snapping back into place, frozen flesh moving again, empty eyes glowing blue one by one. His brothers of the Night's Watch stood again, but not as men. Wildlings pushed themselves up from the snow. Even giants, fallen and silent, began to move once more. Jon should have felt horror. Instead, he felt control. The Night King stepped closer again. For the first time, Jon understood something. The Night King was not just a monster, he was a keeper of balance, of death, of winter, and now Jon was part of that balance. Or perhaps something more. A strange pressure filled the air. Then suddenly, without warning, Jon's hand shot forward on its own. A blast of ice exploded from him, striking the Night King square in the chest. The ancient being staggered. Surprise flashed across those glowing blue eyes. Jon did not understand how he had done it, but he felt it clearly. The power inside him was different, stronger, wilder, not ancient and slow like the Night King's. It was human. The Night King straightened himself, but cracks of frost spread across his armor where Jon had struck him. For the first time in thousands of years, the Night King looked uncertain. Jon stepped forward. Memories returned in broken pieces. Betrayal, daggers in the dark, love, loss. He had always been caught between worlds, Stark and Targaryen, bastard and king, man and ghost. Now he was something else entirely. When the Night King attacked again, Jon caught the blade with his bare hand. Ice wrapped around the steel, shattering it into pieces. The battlefield trembled. The army of the dead fell silent again, as if waiting for a command. Jon looked into the Night King's eyes. And then he understood. There could only be one. With a sudden movement faster than sight, Jon placed his hand on the Night King's chest, the same way it had been done to him. Frost exploded outward in every direction. The sky cracked with a sound like breaking mountains. The Night King did not scream. He simply froze, and then shattered into 1,000 pieces of ice. The army of the dead dropped to their knees instantly. Jon stood alone in the center of it all. But he was no longer Jon Snow. The wind circled around him like a crown. His eyes burned bright blue, brighter than any before. He could feel every corpse across the north, every grave, every fallen soldier beneath the ground. Winter was no longer coming. Winter had a king, and he wore the face of Jon Snow. Far away at Winterfell, the ravens suddenly fell from the sky. The wall trembled the moment he claimed the power. Far away from the frozen battlefield, deep cracks spread like black lightning across the ancient ice. The magic woven into it by the children of the forest began to fade, unraveling thread by thread. For thousands of years, it had stood tall and proud, a barrier between the living and the dead. Now it no longer recognized the threat. Because the threat was no longer beyond it. Jon stood still in the snow as knowledge flooded his mind. It did not come like words or thoughts. It came like instinct, like breathing. He could feel every white kneeling before him. He could feel the cold wind moving across the mountains. He could even sense the faint warmth of living hearts miles away. It burned. Not painfully, just differently. Warmth felt strange now, weak, fragile. He looked down at his hands again. Once they had held Longclaw with honor. Once they had shaken with doubt before battles. Now they did not shake at all. There was no fear left inside him. No hunger, no exhaustion. No mercy either. The army waited. He did not speak. He did not need to. The connection between him and them was deeper than command. It was control. With a simple thought, the dead began to move south. At Winterfell, Arya Stark felt something shift in the air before anyone else did. She was in the courtyard sharpening her blade when the ravens fell from the sky. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They dropped like stones, their small bodies hitting the ground with soft, lifeless thuds. The courtyard went silent. Arya stood slowly, needle still in her hand. Her sharp grey eyes scanned the sky. There were no clouds, no storm. But it felt like one was coming. Inside the great hall, Sansa felt it too. The fire in the hearth flickered violently, almost going out. A cold draft moved through the stone walls, even though the doors were closed tight. Targaryen stopped mid-sentence while speaking. "Did you feel that?" Daenerys Targaryen stepped toward the window. Drogon, resting outside, suddenly lifted his massive head and let out a deep, uneasy growl. Something was wrong. Very wrong. A horn blast echoed from the northern tower. One long note. Then another. And another. 3 blasts. The signal for White Walkers. The hall exploded into chaos. Soldiers grabbed weapons. Unsullied rushed into formation. Northern men ran toward the walls. Arya did not move at first. She knew that signal. She had heard it before. But something inside her twisted painfully. "Jon!" Beyond the broken remains of the old battlefield, the army of the dead moved like a dark river flowing across the snow. Thousands upon thousands, silent, relentless. At their head rode a pale horse. Jon sat tall in the saddle, his posture straight, his face calm and empty. His black curls moved gently in the wind. His blue eyes glowed brighter than the frozen sky. He could see Winterfell already in his mind. He remembered its halls, the smell of bread from the kitchens, Bran staring quietly from corners, Sansa standing strong even when afraid, Arya with her stubborn fire. The memories were there, but they no longer hurt. They simply existed. He raised his hand slightly. The ground ahead began to tremble. From beneath the snow, old bones pushed upward. Forgotten grav from ancient wars cracked open. Skeletons pulled themselves free, answering their king's silent call. Winter was not just an army marching forward. Winter was the land itself waking up. On the walls of Winterfell, men stared in horror as the black line appeared on the horizon. It stretched farther than the eye could see. Grey Worm tightened his grip on his spear. Jaime Lannister whispered under his breath, "Gods help us." Daenerys stepped forward, her silver hair whipping in the wind. She searched the front of the enemy line. And then she saw him. At first, she thought her eyes were lying. The rider on the pale horse wore dark armor covered in frost. His posture was familiar, too familiar. "No," she breathed. Tyrion followed her gaze, his face drained of color. It was Jon, but not the Jon they knew. He stopped his horse just beyond arrow range. The entire army halted with him instantly, like a single body responding to one mind. Silence covered the field. Jon looked up at the walls. His eyes met Daenerys'. For a moment, something flickered behind the blue glow, something human. Daenerys stepped forward, ignoring the fear around her. "Jon," she shouted. Her voice carried across the cold air. There was no response. Arya pushed past soldiers to the edge of the wall. When she saw him, her heart felt like it stopped. That was her brother. But it was. Jon slowly lifted one hand. The dead behind him took one step forward. The sound of thousands of frozen feet crunching against snow echoed like distant thunder. Daenerys felt tears sting her eyes. "Fight it," she whispered, even though he couldn't hear her. But deep inside the frozen mind of the new Night King, something stirred. A memory. Ygritte's laugh. Arya chasing cats in the Red Keep. Sansa teaching him how to speak properly at feasts. Ned Stark's quiet voice, "The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword." For one single second, his hand trembled. The army paused. And that small hesitation did not go unnoticed. Far beneath the godswood of Winterfell, Bran Stark's eyes rolled back into white. He saw everything. He saw Jon's transformation. He saw the moment of weakness. And he saw something else. The power inside Jon was not fully controlled. It was new, unstable, and it was fighting him. Bran whispered softly into the roots of the weirwood tree, "He's still in there." Back on the battlefield, Jon's expression hardened again. The flicker was gone. He lowered his hand sharply, and the army charged. The ground shook as death itself rushed toward Winterfell once more. But this time, it was led by the man they once called brother. The sound of the dead charging toward Winterfell was not like the sound of a normal army. There were no battle cries, no drums, no clashing steel in excitement. It was worse than that. It was silent thunder. Thousands of frozen feet striking snow at the same time, thousands of hollow chests moving without breath. It felt unnatural, like the earth itself was pushing forward. On the walls, archers released their arrows. Dark clouds filled the sky, falling into the charging mass. Some wights dropped. Many did not stop. Those that fell were crushed under the weight of the ones behind them. Daenerys turned to Drogon, Dracarys. The dragon roared, launching into the air. Flames exploded from his mouth, pouring over the front lines of the undead. Fire swallowed hundreds in seconds. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. For a moment, hope flickered. But Jon did not look worried. He watched calmly as his soldiers burned. As soon as Drogon lifted his head to breathe again, Jon raised his hand slightly. The snow around Winterfell began to swirl violently. A blizzard formed out of nowhere, thick and blinding. Winds screamed across the battlefield. Drogon roared in frustration as ice and snow struck his wings, forcing him higher. Daenerys grabbed onto the stone wall to steady herself. "He's controlling the storm," she whispered in disbelief. Tyrion's voice trembled. "He's not just leading them, he is the winter." Below, the Unsullied formed a tight wall of shields. The first wave of whites crashed into them like a wall of bodies. Spears stabbed forward again and again. Grey Worm fought without hesitation, cutting down anything that moved. But every time a white fell, two more climbed over it. Jaime Lannister swung his sword beside Brienne of Tarth. Steel shattered bones, ice-covered fingers clawed at armor. The courtyard quickly turned into chaos. Arya moved differently than the others. She did not fight with brute strength. She slipped through the madness like a shadow, cutting throats, stabbing eyes, moving fast and silent. But even she could see something terrifying. The whites were not wild this time. They were organized. They moved around shields. They pulled men down strategically. They were being guided by him. Through the storm, Jon rode forward slowly, not rushing, not charging. The chaos parted slightly in front of him, as if the dead themselves made space for their king. His glowing eyes scanned the battlefield. He felt every strike against his army. He felt every flame that destroyed them. And with each loss, something cold and angry grew inside him. He dismounted near the broken outer gate. The doors had already begun to crack under the weight of the dead pushing forward. Jon stepped through the battlefield untouched. Any soldier who tried to strike him froze in place before their blade even reached him, their bodies turning stiff with ice before shattering. Inside his mind, something whispered. "They betrayed you. They stabbed you. They chose her over you." The voice was not the old Night King. That presence was gone. This voice was colder, quieter. It sounded like his own doubt. Jon walked into the courtyard as the gate finally collapsed behind him. The dead flooded in. Daenerys landed Drogon inside the castle walls despite the blizzard. She jumped down, her silver hair wild around her face. When she saw Jon standing among the chaos, her heart broke. "Jon," she screamed again. This time, he looked directly at her. For a second, the storm softened. She stepped toward him slowly, ignoring the fighting around them. "You're stronger than this," she said, her voice shaking. "You've always been stronger." His face did not change. But inside him, something twisted painfully. Stronger than this. He remembered kneeling before her, giving up his crown, choosing love over power. And what did it bring him? War, betrayal, death. The whisper inside him grew louder. "They will always use you. They will always fear you. Be what they fear." Jon lifted his hand toward Drogon. The dragon roared, flames building in his throat, but before he could release them, ice shot upward from the ground, wrapping around his legs. Drogon struggled, wings beating wildly, but frost spread across his scales. Daenerys gasped, "No." She ran forward, but a line of whites blocked her path instantly. Jon stepped closer to Drogon. The dragon snapped at him, fire spilling from his mouth. The flames hit Jon directly. When the fire cleared, he stood untouched. Steam rose gently from his armor, but the ice remained. Jon placed his pale hand against Drogon's snout. For a brief moment, dragon and man locked eyes. Drogon roared in pain as blue cracks of frost spread across his dark scales. The mighty dragon's movements slowed. Daenerys screamed his name. Deep inside the frozen mind of the Night King, something broke. He remembered standing beside Daenerys under the northern sky. He remembered her trust, her fire, her belief in him. And suddenly, the storm faltered again. Drogon's ice stopped spreading. Jon's hand trembled. Bran's voice echoed faintly through the wind. carried by the weirwood roots and ancient magic. Jon, you are not the darkness, you are the bridge. Jon staggered slightly, as if struck by something invisible. The whisper inside him roared in anger. You are winter, you are death. But another voice, softer, familiar, pushed back. You are Stark, you are Targaryen, you are human. The blizzard began to split in two, swirling violently as if two forces were fighting inside it. Daenerys saw the change. She pushed past the whites, slashing wildly until she stood only a few steps away from him. Tears streamed down her face. Come back to me. Jon looked at her. The blue in his eyes flickered. For one heartbeat, they were grey again. And then the ground beneath them exploded. From the shattered remains of the old godswood tree outside the courtyard, a massive surge of dark ice shot toward the sky. A deep, ancient sound echoed, not from Jon, but from somewhere older. Something had been awakened. Something that had been waiting for a new Night King to rise. Jon turned his head slowly toward the north. His expression changed. Not confusion. Recognition. The true origin of winter was calling him. And this time, it was not asking. It was commanding. The sound that came from the north was not like thunder, not like a dragon's roar, and not like the cracking of ice. It was deeper, older. It felt like the earth remembering something it had tried to forget. Every man and woman in Winterfell felt it in their bones. The fighting slowed for just a second, as if even the dead were listening. Jon turned fully toward the sound. His glowing blue eyes narrowed slightly. He was no longer looking at Winterfell or Daenerys or the battle around him. He was looking beyond. Beyond the wall. Beyond the land of always winter. To a place even the Night King had once feared. Inside his mind, the whisper changed. It was no longer his doubt. It was something colder, something ancient and heavy. You are not the first. You are not the last. You are only the vessel. Jon's jaw tightened. For the first time since his transformation, he felt something close to anger. Not human anger, something sharper, like pride being challenged. He had shattered the Night King. He had claimed the power. The army obeyed him. He was the master of winter. But now something else was rising. Far to the north, deep beneath glaciers untouched for thousands of years, a massive shape began to move. Ice cracked open around it. Frozen mountains split as if they were nothing but thin glass. The original heart of winter had awakened. Back in the courtyard, Bran Stark suddenly gasped, falling forward from his chair in the Godswood chamber. His eyes rolled back from white to normal, and he began breathing heavily. Mira Reed rushed to his side. What did you see? Bran's voice was quiet but shaken. The Night King was never the source. He was a guard. A guard of what? She asked. Bran looked toward the north, though he could not see it with normal eyes. Of something older than death. Outside, Jon lifted his hand again. The dead around him froze in place, waiting. Daenerys stepped closer, ignoring the danger. Jon, please, whatever it is, fight it. He slowly turned his head back toward her. For a brief second, his face looked tired. Not cold, not cruel. Just tired. You don't understand, he said. It was the first time he had spoken since becoming this creature. His voice echoed strangely, layered with something deeper beneath it, like two beings speaking at once. Daenerys felt hope spark inside her chest. Then make me understand. Jon looked down at his pale hands. I thought I became the enemy. I thought I was the end. His glowing eyes flickered again, but I was chosen. The air around him grew colder with every word. Chosen to prepare the world. For what? Tyrion shouted from behind Daenerys. Jon's gaze slowly shifted to the north again. The storm that he had created began moving in that direction, as if being pulled by something stronger. For him. The ground trembled violently. In the distance beyond the castle walls, a giant wall of ice rose into the sky like a mountain being born. It twisted and shaped itself into something massive. Something alive. The soldiers on the walls stared in horror. Out of the storm stepped a figure larger than any giant ever seen. Its body was made entirely of ancient black ice, cracked with glowing blue light from within. Its eyes were not calm like the Night King's had been. They burned with rage. The first king of winter had awakened. The army of the dead outside Winterfell stopped charging. They turned slowly toward the north, bowing their heads. Even Jon felt it. The connection he had believed was his to control shifted. Pulled, like a leash tightening. The ancient being took one step forward. The sound shook the sky. Bran's voice whispered through the air again, reaching Jon's mind. It created the first White Walker. It allowed the children of the forest to think they controlled it, but it was always waiting. Jon clenched his fists. For the first time, the dead around him did not respond immediately to his thoughts. The ancient king raised one enormous arm. The storm obeyed it completely now, leaving Jon standing in sudden, unnatural calm. The message was clear. You are not the master. You are the servant. Jon's blue eyes flared brighter than ever before. No, he growled, and frost spread across the stones beneath his feet. Daenerys stepped back, feeling the power building between two forces of winter. You said you were chosen, she whispered. Then choose. Jon looked at her. Then at Arya. Then at the castle he had once called home. For so long he had never wanted power. He had run from it, given it away, refused crowns. But now power had taken him. And something else wanted to use him to end everything. The ancient king of winter roared, a sound that split the sky in half. Ice shards rained down across the battlefield. The outer towers of Winterfell cracked. The dead began rising again, not by Jon's will this time, but by the command of the Ancient One. Jon felt control slipping from his grasp. If he did nothing, he would become what the whisper said. A vessel. A doorway. The end of all warmth. He closed his eyes. And for the first time since his death, he forced himself to feel. He felt Ygritte's kiss in the cave. He felt Ghost's fur under his hand. He felt Arya hugging him before leaving Winterfell. He felt Daenerys calling him her king. Pain rushed into him like fire. And the ice inside him cracked. When Jon opened his eyes again, they were no longer fully blue. One burned with cold. The other burned with fire. Steam rose from his armor. The ancient king of winter paused mid-step. Jon raised his hand, not toward Winterfell, but toward the north. If I was chosen, he said quietly, it wasn't to destroy them. His voice shook the courtyard. It was to destroy you. The army of the dead froze between two commands. The ancient king roared in fury. And winter turned on itself. The sky above Winterfell split into two colors. On one side, black storm clouds twisted with blue lightning, the mark of ancient winter. On the other, steam and pale mist rose into the air, glowing faintly red like hidden embers beneath snow. Jon stood between both forces. His armor began to crack, not breaking apart, but changing. Frost crawled over one shoulder while faint lines of heat shimmered across the other. His breath came out half as ice, half as smoke. The ancient king of winter stepped forward again, its massive body grinding against the frozen earth. Each movement crushed trees and shattered stone. Its glowing eyes locked onto Jon with something that almost looked like hatred. Not for humans. For him. You were made to kneel. The voice did not echo like the whispers before. It struck directly into Jon's mind, heavy and commanding. Jon staggered for a second, clutching his head. The ground beneath him cracked under the pressure of two powers fighting inside one body. "I don't kneel anymore," he growled. Around him, the whites began to twitch violently. Some turned toward Winterfell again, others toward the ancient king. The connection between them was tearing apart. Bran's voice pushed through the chaos like a steady thread. "Jon, listen to me. The power inside you is not just death. It's balance. Ice and fire were never meant to be enemies." Jon's eyes flickered. Balance. He was Stark, ice in his blood. He was Targaryen, fire in his name. The ancient king raised both arms. The storm thickened again, darker than before. Ice spikes shot from the ground toward the walls of Winterfell, piercing stone like it was paper. Soldiers screamed as towers collapsed. Arya grabbed Sansa, pulling her away from falling debris. "We need to move," she shouted. Daenerys looked at Drogon, who was still struggling against the ice binding his legs. She placed both hands on his frozen scales, whispering in Valyrian through tears. The frost began melting slowly under her touch. "Fight," she begged him. In the courtyard, Jon dropped to one knee as the ancient force pressed harder against his mind. "You are mine. You carry my mark. You will open the way." Jon's fingers dug into the stone. Frost spread from one hand. Heat cracked the ground from the other. "I am not your doorway," he said through clenched teeth. The ancient king took another massive step. The battlefield trembled so violently that men and whites alike fell to the ground. Far to the north, glaciers continued breaking apart. Something vast and endless lay beyond them, a frozen abyss that had been sealed for thousands of years. The ancient king was not trying to conquer Westeros. It was trying to break the final seal. And Jon was the key. Bran suddenly understood. He spoke louder this time, his voice carried unnaturally through the air. "Jon, when the children of the forest created the first White Walker, they tied the magic to the land. But something older was already here, something trapped beneath the world. The Night King was a lock. You replaced him." Jon's breathing slowed. "A lock, not a master." The ancient king roared again and thrust its arm forward. A beam of pure frozen energy shot toward Jon, striking him directly in the chest. The impact lifted him off the ground and slammed him into the broken wall of Winterfell. Daenerys screamed his name. The stone collapsed around him. For a long moment, there was no movement. The ancient king turned its burning gaze toward the castle itself. Without Jon resisting, the connection shifted again. The dead began marching toward the godswood, toward Bran. "He wants me," Bran whispered calmly. Mira looked terrified. "Why?" "Because I remember," Bran said, "and memory is the only thing older than him." The whites flooded through the courtyard again. Arya saw them moving toward the godswood and understood instantly. "We protect Bran," she shouted, cutting through the chaos. Jaime and Brienne followed her without hesitation. Outside the broken wall, rubble began to move. A pale hand pushed through the stones. Jon stood slowly from the wreckage. His armor was shattered on one side, exposing pale frozen skin crossed with glowing cracks of red light beneath it. His hair fell into his face, half covered in frost, half damp from heat. The ancient king paused when he felt it. Jon was still standing. "You wanted a vessel," Jon said, his voice no longer layered but singular and steady. The air around him shifted violently. "You chose the wrong man." He spread both arms wide. For a second, nothing happened. Then every sword, every piece of dragonglass, every drop of spilled dragonfire on the battlefield began to glow faintly. Ice rose from the ground. Flame erupted from beneath it. The two forces twisted together, spiraling around Jon like a storm within a storm. The ancient king took a step back. For the first time, it felt something close to caution. Jon lifted off the ground slightly, suspended between frost and fire. His eyes burned, one pure blue, the other deep gold like molten metal. "I am not your lock," he said. "I am the end of you." With a violent motion, he thrust both hands forward. The combined force of ice and fire exploded across the battlefield in a blinding wave. It struck the ancient king directly. The impact split the sky. Winter screamed. And far beneath the glaciers, in the true heart of darkness, something ancient and imprisoned began to crack. Not from the outside, but from within. The wave of fire and ice ripped across the battlefield like a living thing. The army of the dead was thrown back, tumbling over each other, their blue eyes flickering in confusion. Frost shattered, flames roared, and for the first time in thousands of years, the dead hesitated. The ancient king of winter roared, a sound that shook mountains, yet it faltered under Jon's power. Each step it took now left cracks of fire in the snow, mixing with ice like the world itself was being torn apart. Its massive black ice armor began to crack, shards falling away to reveal a core of swirling frost and shadow. Jon hovered in the air, suspended between two extremes, his body trembling as the powers waged war within him. One side of him wanted to destroy, to erase the ancient king entirely. The other side felt the responsibility, the weight of being more than a man, the bridge between life and death, fire and ice. Below, Winterfell's defenders pressed forward. Arya, Daenerys, Jaime, Grey Worm, and Brienne fought with everything they had, holding off the scattered whites and protecting the castle's remaining walls. But none of it mattered now. The true war was happening above them, in Jon Snow himself. The ancient king lunged, massive arms swinging toward him. Jon met the strike head-on, a collision of energy so powerful it sent a shockwave across the land. Trees were uprooted, stone shattered, and snow lifted into violent tornadoes. The force sent Daenerys stumbling, Drogon howling in the sky, trying to regain control. Jon's mind surged with every memory of his life. Ned Stark's teachings, Ygritte's laughter, Ghost's loyalty, Arya's cunning, Sansa's resilience, and Daenerys' fire. He felt the weight of every choice he had made, every moment that had led him here. Each memory strengthened him, anchoring the fire and ice within him. "Enough," Jon shouted, his voice carried across the battlefield like thunder. "I am not your servant, I am the end of this." With that, a pillar of combined ice and fire erupted from him, stretching into the sky. It encased the ancient king in a blinding cocoon, the light so intense it made Winterfell's defenders shield their eyes. The frozen horror within the ancient king screamed, a sound that pierced the air and shook the world. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The whites froze, the storm halted midair, the earth itself held its breath. Then, with a single deafening crack, the ancient king shattered into pieces, massive shards of black ice falling like meteors into the distance. The wind howled as the storm began to collapse inward, absorbed by Jon's aura. Jon descended slowly, landing in the courtyard amidst the debris. The whites that remained fell to the ground, lifeless once more. Winterfell was battered, scarred, but alive. The sky cleared, showing a faint golden light breaking through clouds, the first sun the north had seen in what felt like an eternity. Daenerys ran toward him, her tears freezing on her cheeks. "Jon," she shouted, embracing him, you did it. You saved us." Jon's gaze softened, though one eye still glimmered pale blue. "I didn't just save you," he said quietly. "I saved the world from itself." Arya approached silently, looking at him with awe and fear. "You're not just Jon Snow anymore." He shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "I'm still me, but I've become something more, something the world will need if it's ever to survive again." Bran appeared from the godswood, his calm presence grounding everyone. "You've balanced fire and ice, Jon. The ancient power is gone for now, but the mark remains. You've become the new guardian, stronger than any Night King, yet still human." Jon looked toward the horizon, the wind softly carrying the remnants of frost across the land. "Winter will always come," he said, his voice steady, "but now it will come on my terms." Drogon landed beside him, shaking the last bits of frost from his scales. Jon reached out, and the dragon nudged his shoulder gently. The living and the dead, the fire and the ice, all were quiet, waiting for the next command. For the first time in a long time, Jon felt peace, not because the battle was over, not because Winterfell was safe, but because he had finally accepted what he had become, a bridge between life and death, fire and ice, man and legend. The golden light of dawn spread over Winterfell. Jon Snow, once a bastard of Winterfell, once a servant of duty, now stood as something far greater, a king of a different kind, a king who could command winter and bend it to protect the living. And somewhere deep in the north, beyond the horizon, the ancient forces that had once ruled the frozen lands stirred no more. For now, the north had a guardian, and his name, even if spoken in fear, would live forever: Jon Snow, the Night King who chose humanity. The aftermath of the battle left Winterfell scarred but standing. Snow and ash covered the courtyards, and shattered walls bore witness to the chaos that had unfolded. The soldiers and villagers who survived wandered cautiously, unsure if the dead might rise again. But Jon stood at the center of it all, watching silently, a figure both human and something else entirely. Daenerys approached him, her hands still trembling. "Jon, the North, the world, you saved them, but at what cost?" Jon's gaze swept across the broken courtyard. He saw the fires dying, the snow settling, and the bodies of whites scattered everywhere. "It wasn't about cost," he said quietly. "It was about choice. I could have been the servant, the vessel of the ancient power, but I chose to protect, not destroy." Arya walked beside him, her eyes sharp and wary. "And what about the army of the dead? The North will always fear that power. Even if you control it, others will see you as a monster." Jon looked down at his hands, still faintly glowing with residual frost and fire. "A monster, perhaps, but a monster that understands humanity, that's the difference." Bran stepped closer, his face serene but eyes heavy with knowledge. "Jon, there are forces in this world older than kings, older than the North itself. They will remember your choice, and they will respect it for now. But you must remain vigilant. Power like yours attracts more than awe. It attracts fear, envy, and those who would use it." Jon nodded. "I understand." The words felt heavy, as if speaking them made them real. "I've seen what happens when someone like me is manipulated, when power becomes a weapon without purpose. I won't let that happen again." Daenerys touched his arm. "Then we rebuild together." She looked at him with a mixture of relief and caution. "Not just Winterfell, the North, all of Westeros. There's a lot to fix." Jon's gaze turned toward the horizon, the first soft rays of sunlight breaking over the mountains. "Westeros will never be the same, but it can survive. We survived the dead once. We can survive ourselves." Arya smirked faintly. "I just hope survival doesn't mean more politics and more lies. That's almost worse than the dead." Jon allowed a faint smile. "I'll handle the dead, you handle the politics." The survivors began emerging from the wreckage. Soldiers checked on villagers, others tended to the wounded. Daenerys and Jon moved among them quietly, acknowledging those who looked at him with fear, those who looked at him with awe. He had become a symbol now, not just of power, but of choice, of restraint, and of the strange balance between life and death. Far beyond the castle, Jon could still sense remnants of the ancient king's influence lingering in the north. Fragments of dark energy, like whispers of winter, tried to reach him. He touched the ice on his arm, feeling the frost pulse beneath his skin, not as a weapon, not as a curse, but as a reminder of the responsibility he bore. Bran spoke quietly beside him. "One day, the North may call on you again. When it does, you must answer. Not as a Stark, not as a Targaryen, but as the bridge between the living and the dead." Jon closed his eyes, breathing in the cold air, letting it fill him. For the first time, he felt not just power, but purpose. He had faced the ancient, defied it, and emerged not broken, but strengthened. He opened his eyes to see Arya sharpening needle, Daenerys speaking with Tyrion, and soldiers and villagers tending to the aftermath. And somewhere in the distance, Ghost padded silently through the snow, joining him. Jon knelt, placing a hand on the wolf's head. "We have a lot to do," he said softly. Ghost nudged his hand, loyal as ever. Jon stood, looking once more toward the horizon. Winter was still here, always coming, but now it had a king who understood it, not as a force of death, but as a force of balance. A protector, a bridge, a guardian of life itself. And the North, battered yet alive, would remember that day forever. The day Jon Snow became more than a man, more than a king, more than the Night King. He became the force that could hold both ice and fire, death and life, in his hands, and choose which to give to the world. The days after the battle were quiet, almost eerily so. Winterfell was in ruins, but the survivors worked tirelessly to restore it. Snow still blanketed the land, but it was lighter now, soft and gentle rather than harsh and cutting. The air felt different, less of death, more of something alive, something waiting. Jon walked through the castle grounds, observing the repairs. Soldiers worked alongside villagers, clearing rubble, rebuilding walls, and tending to the wounded. Even the wildlings who had survived looked cautiously toward him, uncertain if the man they once knew was still Jon Snow or something else entirely. Arya followed him silently. "Do you think they'll ever trust you again?" she asked, her voice quiet. Jon looked down at her, his mismatched eyes catching the light. "I don't know, but I don't need them to trust me. I just need them to survive, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure they do." She nodded slowly, her hand resting on the hilt of needle. "I don't like that you have this power. It makes people fear you." Jon smiled faintly, a shadow of the man he used to be. Fear can be a tool if used wisely, but it can also destroy everything you care about. That's why I have to control it, not the other way around. Daenerys approached then, her presence quiet but commanding. "Jon," she said softly, "the people of the North are wary. They may never forgive you for becoming what you did, but they will follow you if they see that you fight for them, not for power." Jon nodded. "I've seen what power without purpose does. I won't make that mistake again." Bran joined them, his gaze steady. "The ancient forces of winter are weakened, but not gone. One day something will rise again. The balance you hold now will be tested." Jon's expression hardened. "Then I'll be ready. Whatever comes, I'll face it. I've faced the dead, I've faced myself, and I've faced something older than this world. Nothing else can scare me." Ghost appeared at Jon's side, padding silently through the snow. Jon knelt, running a hand over the wolf's fur. "You've always been loyal," he murmured. "Even when I couldn't be human, even when I was lost." Ghost nuzzled him in response, eyes bright and alert. Jon's heart, or what remained of it, ached with a faint warmth. He had become something more than human, yet moments like this reminded him of who he once was. Far to the north, the remnants of the ancient king's power slowly dissipated. Jon could sense it, like a faint echo of the storm he had faced. He closed his eyes, feeling the pull of the magic that had tried to consume him. But now it was different. It was not a threat. It was a reminder, a test that he had passed. Daenerys watched him, admiration and worry both present in her eyes. "Jon, you've changed everything. The north of the world, it's in your hands now. Are you ready for that?" Jon stood, looking toward the horizon where snow met sky. His mismatched eyes reflected both the cold of ice and the warmth of fire. "I don't know if anyone is ever ready for that," he said quietly, "but I am who I am, and I will protect what matters, no matter the cost." Arya smirked. "Then let's make sure we survive long enough for that to matter." Jon's gaze softened for the first time in what felt like years. "Yes, we survive together." The wind swept across Winterfell, gentle now, carrying with it a promise. Winter would always come. But under Jon Snow's watch, it would no longer be a harbinger of death. It would be a guardian, a force to protect life, and a reminder that even in the coldest winters, fire could survive. And somewhere deep in the north, beyond the mountains and frozen plains, the ancient forces stirred faintly, watching, waiting. But for now, their challenge had been met. And Jon Snow, the Night King who had chosen humanity, had become the bridge between worlds, the protector of both life and death. The days turned into weeks, and Winterfell slowly began to heal. Walls were rebuilt, snow cleared from courtyards, and the villagers returned to their daily routines. Yet the shadow of the battle, the memory of the army of the dead, and Jon's transformation lingered in the hearts of all who had survived. Jon walked through the reconstructed streets, observing the cautious smiles and wary glances. Children played in the snow, unaware of the horrors that had unfolded, yet the elders whispered, telling stories of the Night King who had become human again, and then something more. Daenerys joined him as they stood on the outer wall, looking toward the horizon. The sun was rising, soft golden light touching the icy mountains. "The North will never forget," she said quietly, "nor will Westeros. They'll speak of you in fear and awe for generations." Jon's gaze did not leave the mountains. Let them remember, but let them also know that winter isn't just death. It can protect, it can preserve, it can teach. That's what I've learned. Arya appeared beside them, her eyes sharp as ever. "And if the dead rise again?" she asked. "If something older than the Night King returns?" Jon's expression hardened, but there was a calm certainty in his voice. "Then I'll be ready, and not just me, the people I protect will be ready too. I've seen what it takes to face true darkness. We survived it once, and we'll survive it again." Bran came to stand behind them, silent as always. "Jon," he said softly, "you have become more than any Stark or Targaryen. You are a bridge, a guardian. The North, and perhaps all of the world, depends on your vigilance." Jon nodded. He thought of Ghost, padding silently beside him, of Arya and Sansa, of Daenerys, of the friends and soldiers who had fought beside him. And he thought of himself, the man who had once been afraid, who had once been lost, who had once died, and now stood as something new. He knelt for a moment, touching the snow-covered ground. The frost beneath his fingers pulsed faintly, not as a threat, but as a reminder of the power he bore. A power that could destroy, but more importantly, a power that could protect. "I've seen death," he murmured, "and I've faced it. I've held winter in my hands and refused to let it consume me. Now I understand what it means to be responsible for both life and death." Daenerys stepped closer, resting a hand on his arm. "Jon, whatever happens, we stand with you." Jon looked at her, then at Arya, then at the horizon where the sun touched the icy peaks. "I know," he said, "and together we will make sure that the living always have a chance, that the North always survives, that humanity always survives." The wind swept across Winterfell, gentle but purposeful, carrying with it the memory of what had been lost and the promise of what could be saved. Jon Snow, once a bastard of Winterfell, once a servant of duty, once the Night King, now stood as a guardian, not just of the North, but of life itself. And though the ancient forces of winter still lingered in the far reaches of the world, for now they waited, watching a king who had faced them and survived, with both ice and fire in his hands and humanity in his heart. Jon Snow turned, looking back at Winterfell one last time. The castle stood tall, scarred but alive, a symbol of survival and resilience. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold air mix with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Winter had come, but under Jon Snow's watch, it was no longer a bringer of death. It was a protector. And for the first time in a long time, the North could truly breathe. The story of Jon Snow, the man who became the Night King and chose humanity, would live forever.